Attachment theory is a way that people can describe how you bond to other people emotionally. Attachment styles are usually formed in childhood, and it's based on how your caregivers responded to your needs. Did they neglect you? You have to fend for yourself a lot, not even ask for your needs to be met. Depending on how that went, you learned how to respond to them and how to get your own needs met. Or as an adolescent and then an adult, you developed friendships and relationships that further solidified how you respond to others. If you were bullied in high school, you probably learned not to trust others. If you find yourself in an abusive relationship, that also changes your attachment style. It's a combination of how you were raised and how traumatic your relationships were. Now, women tend to be more anxious in relationships. Women get these anxious attachment styles because of the way that they were brought up. Not only might they have had problems with their parents where they didn't feel as loved as they maybe should have, not only did they have maybe bullies or abusive relationships as they became adults, but they were also raised to believe that they only have value if they're in a relationship. They only have value if a man approves of them. So we worry that we aren't doing enough for him, we aren't pleasing him enough sexually, we aren't pretty enough, and what it really boils down to is we're afraid that we'll be rejected or abandoned. We were raised to always put ourselves last, to always be people pleasers, to make sure everybody else is comfortable. Even if we aren't comfortable, we always have to be providing what someone else wants. And because of that, we never really feel like we'll be loved for who we actually are. So therefore, we're constantly anxious, like, oh my God, what can I do to make sure he's gonna stay with me? If you're anxiously attached, being in a relationship tends to take over your life and you become fixated on him. You'll find it's difficult to have time away from him because space feels like a threat. It feels like something could come in between you two. You often perceive what's going on inside his mind, and you perceive that there's a problem in the relationship, and that gets you like in this anxious spiral. You think you know what's going on in his mind. You think he doesn't like you anymore. You'll require a lot of reassurance and a lot of attention from your partner. That way there isn't this space and there isn't a perception of anything being wrong in the relationship if he's constantly giving you attention and he's constantly reassuring you that no, it's okay. If he fails to do what you'd like him to do, then you take that as confirmation that he doesn't actually love you and there is a problem in the relationship, and that will get you going down the anxious spiral too. There are ways to heal your anxious attachment. The first thing you can do is ask yourself, is the man that you're with toxic, emotionally unavailable, or does he have an avoidant attachment style? Because if he's one of those three things, chances are he's going to actually trigger you into being anxious, even if you were previously secure in relationships. Just because those things tend to bring out more anxiety in us if we're trying to make that relationship work. But there's nothing that you can do within the relationship to make the relationship any better, because he is who he is and you're not going to be able to change that. The only way to get out of that is to end the relationship. The next thing you can do is just be aware that you have this anxious attachment, and then plan ahead for these anxious moments and think of things that you would be okay doing, you would be happy doing in the event that you're anxious about not being with him. So things like binging a TV show or a movie or reading a book or cleaning out a closet. A lot of us like to clean when we're stressed, or painting a room, yard work. There's different things that, sure, it's not going to be the most fun, but it'll take your mind off it because it's something that you enjoy doing. So brainstorm some of those things. The next thing you need to get ready to do is to feel the feelings. When your spidey senses start to tingle, just sit there, stop for a minute, and just feel what you're feeling. Because so often we reach for something to stop that anxious feeling. And usually the things we reach for tend to not be very good for us, like alcohol or drugs or texting an ex to get an ego boost. Now that you've started feeling those feelings, just reassure yourself that the things that you're thinking probably aren't true. You can't actually read his mind. The worst case scenario almost never actually happens. You know you have an anxious attachment style, so you know you tend to make these things up in your mind and they get out of control and cause problems. Quite often in these anxious attachment relationships, you'll find that what you thought was going on wasn't actually what was going on. And the more you experience that, the more you can also remind yourself of that. And I have a pretty bad track record at trying to figure this stuff out. So maybe I should just remember that the things I'm thinking probably aren't true. The next thing to do is don't give in to people-pleasing behavior. Since you have a pattern of thinking that you're not good enough as you are, we tend to fall into people-pleasing patterns where you might not want to do something, but you want to make the person that you're with happy, so you go along and you do it anyway. You're not paying attention to what you need and what you want or don't want. You're just doing things to make the other person think, oh, she's amazing. She just does all this stuff all the time for me and she's perfect. And that leads to resentment because you're going to be like, I can't believe he wants me to do this again. And then once the resentment builds like that, then you change who you are completely because you're like, I can't do this anymore. And he's like, well, what the heck? Why did you completely change personalities on me? The next thing you need to do is to read about reality. So if you go online and you read about anxious attachment, you're going to find that there are thousands and thousands of people thinking the exact same thoughts that you're thinking, and that this is not something that only you're experiencing. It really helps because you feel like you're not alone and you feel like it's a common thing. And since it's a common thing, there must be a way through this because other people have successful relationships and you can too. The next thing you can do is to be honest with him. Tell him that you struggle with anxious attachment. Tell him that you're going to need a lot of reassurance and attention, and that you might tend to think that there's a problem if you don't hear from him. And you can tell him these things, but it's not on him to do everything that you're asking for. Okay? It's important that you learn to soothe yourself by doing the other things I just mentioned. But you can absolutely let him know because many people will be understanding of that and will want to help. So there's nothing wrong with that. The next thing you can do is to set boundaries, set healthy boundaries for yourself. I'm not going to be in a relationship where I'm constantly left hanging and I don't hear from somebody. If that is what is going to happen, then I'm going to leave the relationship. It's on you, it's not on him once again. And that goes along with the last point about being honest with him. Setting boundaries, well, while you're being honest with him, like, this is something that is just, I can't deal with. We tend to have very flimsy boundaries because, again, we feel like they're not really going to like me if I let on that I have these issues. I'm just going to kind of let him get away with whatever because otherwise he won't be with me any longer. The next thing you can do is learn to love yourself. And I know this sounds really cringy and gross to somebody with an anxious attachment because somebody in the past didn't love you the way that they were supposed to love you. I know it's weird to think that you have to learn to love yourself when all you want is somebody to love you. But if you want to have a healthy relationship, it starts with actually being okay with who you are alone. Don't have value when you're with somebody. It doesn't add any value to who you are. And then the last thing you can do to heal your anxious attachment is to work with me. I have attachment style coaching available. It really takes looking at the cesspool of patriarchy that underlies all the things that we tend to think about ourselves. And then on top of that, there's trauma. But you can't unwind the trauma without also getting into the underlying reasons that you think the way that you think. If you decide to work with me with attachment style coaching, what I'll do is I'll give you some prep work, and that will kind of give me a baseline of how you feel about things right now and how things are going. After that, we have a 90-minute session together where I kind of explore a little deeper your past relationships, your important friendships, your childhood. And following that, I'll return your prep work to you with a bunch of notes that show this flawed patriarchal way of thinking so that we can begin to work on the lies that you're believing, the limiting beliefs that you have. You'll have 4 weeks of one-on-one coaching with me, where I'm available anytime you need so that we can work through this action plan that I'll get back to you, make adjustments along the way, and I can answer any questions that you might have as they come up.